So we spoke to an investor who invests in highly promising companies in the area. We spoke to a digital therapeutics entrepreneur who was convinced, much like many in the area, that music is an experience and an integral part of the psychedelic experience. Yet, the experience is subjective. Beyond the subject itself, no one else can actually see or understand what's happening. The only way to gather information is if the person undergoing the psychedelic therapy talks about their experience, which we know happens in the psychotherapy sessions. Are you ready for the big question? It is something that ties our primary area of technology in healthcare research to the area of psychedelic medicine. What if one can truly understand what is happening to the areas of the brain when someone is dosed with a psychedelic molecule? What if there was a way to understand neural signatures of a psychedelic experience, or inform the physicians which part of the brain surface is active and which isn't? Why is this important? Because you can understand the signature of a patient in therapy at baseline, through therapy, and during follow-up. Imagine the richness in the data that comes from such a technology if it's available. And what if one had such a system? One that informs and provides a better understanding of the human brain under the influence of a psychedelic. Well, we explored that too. Around the time that we spoke to Doug Drysdale, CEO of Cybin, it was announced that Cybin is exploring a collaboration with Kernel.
Kernel is a technology company started by Brian Johnson. Brian Johnson, a former founding CEO of Braintree, a company that processed online payments and counts Venmo as one of its acquisitions, and was itself acquired by PayPal for $800 million. So Brian Johnson invests $50 million of his own money into building Kernel. Kernel, despite its different focus in the early days, now focuses on building hardware to understand hemodynamic and electrical signals from the surface of the brain and the cortex. There are some fundamental technical challenges that they had to overcome, which they seem to have worked through. Currently, a Kernel wearable helmet that looks like something from Star Trek uses a non-damaging and safe laser imaging technology that utilizes magnetoencephalogram, a concept not that different from the emerging magnetocardiography to measure electrical activity on the surface of the brain. The helmet has various hexagonal modules spliced together to form a sensor surface that can compartmentalize and provide high-fidelity data during natural human experiences. So we asked Doug Drysdale, CEO of Cybin, how they intend to use Kernel's expertise. Here's Doug. In fact, his answer made total sense, and so does their collaboration with Kernel.
So it's good questions. On the preclinical side, you're right, it's been notoriously difficult to translate CNS or psychiatry animal models into man, and been many failures over the years. And part of what attracted us to this space, though, is that we know a lot about these molecules already. They've been in the public domain for since the 50s for psilocybin, for example, LSD. And so the parent molecules, the scaffolds that we're using, we already know quite a lot about how they work in man. I mean, it's unusual, isn't it, to have so much in-man data available in these kind of conditions. So we have the benefit of being able to take those well-known molecules, as parent scaffolds, and then, as I say, using the chemistry and delivery, adjust how we deliver them and how they work in the body. And we have already seen in some of our preclinical work that there seems to be no difference between the activity of our altered molecules and the original parent molecules. So that gives us good confidence as we go into the clinic. On the clinical side of things, you're right. The data in this space, when you're looking at, say, depression, for example, is largely subjective, and part of that is the lack of scalable technology. So there's good neuroimaging technology that exists today, fMRI or MEG, for example, but these are multi-million-dollar pieces of equipment that are room-sized. And they take up, a massive amount of space, and they need a PhD technician to run them. So that makes them difficult to access for patients, and let alone the fact that the patient's lying in a tube with 120 decibels clanging around their head. It makes it hard to get into those technologies frequently. And that's why our partnership with Kernel out in the West Coast is really interesting, because they've, over the last 5 years, managed to take well-known neuroimaging, optical imaging technology and miniaturize it. They've developed high-powered lasers, and they've developed new chips that can handle all the data that come out of a device that is portable. And that portability transforms the way that we can do neuroimaging. So we're hopeful that we can, in the second half of this year, start to study using the Kernel Flow device, this wearable neuroimaging helmet. It uses functional near-infrared spectroscopy, by the way, lots of long words. But we can use that on patients in a more longitudinal basis. So we can study the patient's neural activity before, during, and after treatment. It'd be interesting, I think, to see if the neuroplasticity that we've seen under fMRI has some durability. Does it continue? How temporary is it? How long does it last? And I think also when you get down into lower doses of these molecules, sub-perceptual doses, where do we still see neural activity or change in activity at those levels? And there you might be able to use the quantitative data now to develop treatments for potentially cognitive impairment or attention deficit, where traditionally those studies have been very, very difficult because the effect sizes are quite small and hard to measure on a qualitative level. So the technology is going to help, we think, to learn a lot more. That said, all of that said, our lead clinical study, which is a phase 2 program for major depressive disorder that we're about to enter into, is using typical qualitative MADRS scale, Montgomery-Åsberg scale. But those scales have been well accepted and well used over time.
It's early days, but definitely it's one example of how psychedelic drug discovery companies are trying to leverage technology for use. Finally,